All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And this evening, we have author Amy Poeppel with us. She's going to be talking about, well, we're all going to be talking about her latest book, The Sweet Spot. And thank you so much for making some time for us and coming to hang out with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. Thrilled to talk to you.
So sorry. We were just talking about how we need to see each other to play off each other so we don't talk over each other. And we're off to a great
And
start.
then we talk over each other, which I feel like we've been doing quite a bit of as we're still getting our group back after our break.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say, Amy, was that I'm thrilled to have you because I want to pick your brain about this book, which is, I feel like this is what this podcast is here for. It's not for other people's enjoyment. It's for us to pick authors' brains apart about their wonderful books. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Well, I love to talk about writing and books and all of that. So this is great.
Oh, we're so going to dive right in. It's going to be fun.
This podcast has become like a master class in writing.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we record it and other people can listen to it is a great side effect, but it's really for us.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Good. It's great.
But for our listeners who may not yet be familiar with The Sweet Spot, can you give us an overview of what it's about?
Yes, I would love to. The Sweet Spot is my fourth book, and it's a comedy. It's about three women who live in Greenwich Village who have every reason to hate each other, even though they don't even know each other at the outset of the book. And they end up bonding for a number of reasons, one of which is a baby that belongs to none of them. And it's definitely a story about women reinventing themselves at any age. And it's a lot about rage. I didn't know for sure that I was going to be writing a book about revenge and rage, but that sort of became a big part of it as well. And it's definitely a love letter to my neighborhood, Greenwich Village.
I love books that, see, here we go again.
We need
those auction paddles that you can just hold up.
Okay, Michelle, you can go.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was going to say, I love books that really bring a neighborhood or a city or a community that, it doesn't matter if you're familiar with it, but if you know a community, it's like, oh, I know that restaurant or I know that coffee shop, but I have actually never been to Greenwich Village. So books that bring places to life that I've never been to are just so fun to read because I get to visit.
Yeah.
Inexpensively.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely felt like the right setting for this book because I think of Greenwich Village. I've lived there for about 15 years now. And I really think of it as in many ways as being the sweet spot of the city. It is absolutely charming. Parts of it feel very much like a village. It feels like a little charming town in some ways. And then at the exact same time, it is so gritty and at times disgusting. And it's sort of this, it's just like this perfect combination of the best and worst that New York has to offer, if that makes sense. I live right on Bleecker Street, which is, I'm on the, if you can call it the NYU campus, I'm on the campus. And of course it's a city school, so there isn't really a campus, but Washington Square Park is kind of NYU's quad. And Bleecker Street is just fun and lively. But there are, mornings after a big Saturday night where all the students have been there and you have to step over garbage and vomit sometimes. I mean, it's really loud and yet sort of like the park is just beautiful. So it's just a funny place that I wanted a chance to write about.
Every time I go to New York City, I always make a point of going to Greenwich Village, to stopping in and visiting the area. And especially when people picture Greenwich Village, it's what you see or New York City, I should say, what they picture on New York City. Most of the time it's Greenwich Village, where, if I'm not mistaken, that's where Carrie's home was in Greenwich
Yeah.
Village. Famously, the Friends, they all lived in that one apartment in Greenwich Village. And that's like, when you think of New York, it's
Yes.
essentially, that's the area. Unless you're thinking about the crime and stuff, and that goes into other areas.
Yeah, it's where Harry and Sally say goodbye to each other after their epic drive across the country. They stand right, and they're standing, the car is pulled up right where the big arch is in Washington Square Park, which I don't know if you guys happen to see it. I do this weird, everyone talks about like marketing for books and stuff. Did you guys see the book trailer that I made?
Yes.
Yes.
The interview that you did in Washington Square, we shared it on our Instagram.
Yeah. I've done those for 3 of my books. I didn't do one for Limelight, and I really wish that I had, but I just get these little ideas. And for Limelight, it's funny because it's my most theatrical book in some ways, but I just didn't get that spark of an idea to do a book trailer. But this one, I really wanted to show that sort of combination of things that Greenwich Village is. I mean, that park, there are children everywhere, and there's a big dog park and a little dog park and families. And yet it's also what Greenwich Village is, what any city is, it's just a wonderful place. I love it.
And so what are some of your techniques for being able to put the place in the book itself?
So it's funny because that's not the part of writing that comes the most easily or naturally to me. I'm a person who, I love to write dialogue, and I love to just put 2 characters together and have them talk. The thing about place for me, setting, I just have to be in that world long enough that I get to feel as though I know every room, every little idiosyncrasy of the house or whatever. I just have to really sort of live in that world for a long time. And certainly for this book, that was the case. I thought of that brownstone sort of as almost like a theater set. I sort of decorated the entire thing the way that I wanted to. I wanted it to be one of those sort of grand brownstones that I walk by and covet. I just think they're beautiful. But as I tend to do, I don't like to make my characters too comfortable. So for some reason, I love to give my characters just terrible appliances, for example, and bad wallpaper and somebody else's stuff cluttering up the house, like stuff that's there and you can't really get rid of it. And so this is an unrenovated brownstone. That was kind of important to me. And yes, I think when I sit there and I put my characters there and I have them talking to each other and I have these situations happen, I'm just picturing in my head where they are all the time. But I have to go in and fill a lot of that in later, because when I first start writing, it's just dialogue. I don't even want to use dialogue tags. I just want to write a script, really. Mm-hmm. But that's what novels are not scripts, and they need a lot of background, and you need to know what the characters are doing while they're talking. And that's the stuff that's hard work for me. I have to go in later and really fill that stuff in. But I love the brownstone. I love the house.
Oh, I love it too. I love walking down that road and seeing those houses one after another. And if I ever moved to New York City, I wouldn't do it unless I was able to have one of those brownstones.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah. It's the Carrie life, right?
Yes. Exactly.
And so when you mentioned screenwriting and bringing that up, that brings me to one of my other questions, because we're just popping all over the place with all our questions here. When I talk about writing and the difference between screenwriting and novel writing, I say that writing a screenplay is akin to writing a pop song. And I don't say this as an insult, but it's writing pop music is a whole different category from writing a novel, which I relate to writing a symphony, because there's so many, in my opinion, there's so many little intricacies that you have within a novel. And from what I could see on your website, you have written screenplays before. Am I correct?
Well, I'm actually working on like an original series right now, but my first
Oh,
book, Small
cool.
Admissions, actually started as a play. So I
Mhm.
wrote a play.
Mhm.
It was loosely a cousin of what ended up being the book Small Admissions. I agree with you completely in that the director and the actors do a lot of the work that novelists have to do on the page, right? Because you can write your script, but then the director comes in and the actors come in and they're doing the facial expressions and they're picking up the objects or crying or whatever it is that the actors are doing. But when you're a novelist, you have to do all of that work on the page. So I also find it I agree with you. I think it's a skill and it's one I'm working on. I don't with novel writing too. I think it's a skill that's as hard as novel writing. I just think it's very different.
Mhm.
To get the arc in, for example, like in a 1.5 hour movie, to get all of that in there with just dialogue, I really take my hat off to screenwriters. But yes, so Small Admissions started as a play. We actually did a reading of it at the Actors Studio. I learned so much from that. It was terrible, to be perfectly honest. I realized how repetitive I was. I kept hearing the actors as they were reading it and thinking to myself, wait, I said that already. I said like the audience knows that already. So I read my books out loud. I read my dialogue out loud all the time. And then I cut like 50% of it, because in the same way that if you write a play, you need to trust that the audience is paying attention and not hit them over the head with the same thing 50 times. And I think it's the same thing with writing. You've got to trust that your readers are smart and they're listening, they're paying attention. So you don't need to tell them something that you've made clear in another way. So sometimes, the line of dialogue will make something clear, and then I'll go in and then I'll say it again. And then it's during the editing process that I love to go through and go, wait, no, the reader already knows that. They already know that. That to me is one of the most pleasurable parts of writing, is getting to go through and trust your readers, trust how smart they are, and know that if you've said it 3 times, that's 2 times too many.
So
Yes.
a fun game could be to take the entire dialogue of a novel, give it to some friends, and have them act out your novel for you.
Yep, I do this.
And it could be a writing exercise.
Yeah, it's the best thing in the world to do for novels. So one of the things I did when my second book came out, it's about a mom and a pop star who's, in his very early 20s. And one of my sons was exactly the age that this pop star was. So I would take a line of my book, of about like 3 pages of the book. I would cut all the dialogue tags and I would just have him read the scenes with me. And we ended up doing that during my book launch for that book. I ended up reading scenes with him instead of doing like a normal reading. But I'm telling you, that is the best exercise in the world, because you will pick up on mistakes. You'll pick up on, wait a minute, nobody talks like that. Like, that's not how they would say that. So I highly recommend doing exactly that. Get a group of friends together, take out all the dialogue tags, just bring it down just to the dialogue and have them read it. Then you can fill the rest back in later, but it'll really let you hear in a painful way sometimes what you've done wrong, and the right parts will just sing. You'll just know that's exactly right. That feels like a conversation.
That could really be a fun night. You've had some wine, you have parts for everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, that could be so much fun.
Especially, do you guys know Linda Cohen-Loigman? She's the author of The Matchmaker's Gift. I don't know if you know.
Yes, I'm familiar with the book.
She's a terrific writer. And she was just telling me that she's working on a scene where there are many, many characters in the room at the same time. And I love to do that. Like, I love to have like a party in my books or whatever. And those scenes are such a challenge to write, because you can't just say, he said, she said, he said, so you have to find a way to show the dialogue and not have it become too much of a script or just too like it's just a challenge. So that's what I think. I think have a party, have an action party, assign parts to everybody, and then just have the dialogue read.
I like
feel
this idea.
we need to start doing parties like that. Have that where it's like a critique
Dialogue
group, but with
parties.
dialogue parties. I think I think that's going to be my next party. I think that's going to happen.
Invite me.
Okay. You're
Ooh, we could even do it
automatically
virtually. It doesn't even have to be in person.
Oh
Right.
my God.
A Zoom dialogue party. I think it's a great idea.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh,
Ideas are just born on this podcast. It's
Yes.
all the time.
Oh, we're still gonna make this happen, and it's gonna be so much fun.
As long as I'm invited.
Okay, of course, we will invite you.
Top of the list as co-creator of the dialogue parties.
And I want a good part. I want to be assigned like a really good part.
Naturally. And are you going to extend this invitation to anybody else who chooses to have a virtual dialogue party?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, so they can reach out to you and be like, hey, I'm gonna have a dialogue party. You want to come?
Exactly. It's a really good like editing technique. I think it really does work to hear it out loud.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. And I read sarcasm very well, just as like a director's note.
Excellent.
She does. It's a true story. She absolutely does. Oh, we're still gonna make this happen. I'm gonna send out the invites. We're gonna do it.
Perfect.
So switching gears, I want to talk for a second about writing comedy and inserting wit and banter in. I know we've talked a lot about dialogue, but I feel like can be such a tricky thing to write. And I personally have to be like in a very specific mindset, and I have to like have a certain level of snark. Like it's very difficult to explain. Like I can feel it when I'm typing, like, oh, I'm in a snarky mood today.
Yeah.
But that's not really sustainable when you're writing a full-length novel. How do you approach creating that atmosphere and that vibe throughout the course of a novel like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really hard. And I find it immensely satisfying when I can get it right. Or if readers say to me, I just laughed out loud during this one scene, like that makes me so happy. But again, it's all about what you think is funny in your first draft, and then you realize it's not working. And, it's all about just editing and redoing the scene. And what if there was the scene, there's a scene in the book where the dad is with just his children and their newfound family gerbil is in there. And it's a scene with kids. And I love writing about kids because I think they're so funny. I think they're so unscripted. And my first book, the book I was telling you about, Small Admissions, is all about kids at their funniest. But that scene, that was sort of it was a big challenge for me to get the humor to come across in the way that I wanted to. Like and to me, it's all just character driven. Once I sort of figured out who this dad, Leo, who's sort of an absent-minded professor type, and he's trying to teach his children something, and he's sort of giving them a biology lesson. And what I really had to do was think, where is he coming from? And what's he trying to do? And then how are each one of these children going to hear it, given who they are? And it's really difficult. I was so excited when, did you guys read Less, Andrew Sean Greer?
No, I haven't. It's on my to-do list. I mean, I have an overflowing TBR list.
The to-be-read list.
Yes, and I especially want to read it because that was a Pulitzer winner.
Yes.
Yes. So it's like a double on my list of books I need to read.
And it's just delightful. I actually just read the sequel, Less is Lost. And sometimes with sequels, I'm like, oh, I hope I won't be disappointed. I was not disappointed. I liked it as much, if not more, than his first one, Less. But I was so happy that won a Pulitzer because it's humor. I mean, it's heartfelt. felt. That's my thing, is that for humor to work for me, I have to care about the people who are saying things, you know, if it's going to make me laugh, I have to like care about them. And that's what he did in that book. And I think he did it so brilliantly. And I was just so happy to see society sort of say, that's a skill, you know, that's hard to do. Because comedy, I mean, it's hard to make people cry too.
Mhm.
And I can't do it. Almost every book I've written, I've had someone die and then I've brought them back to life, because I just can't do it. I can't do sex either. I try, but it just always comes out funny. I don't know. I can't do earnest sex. I'll put it that way. And in fact, anything too earnest is just hard for me. I think I think we all have to sort of use what we come into writing with, whatever that is, and just sort of go with that. But so I prefer that. I prefer to see the humor in situations, even hard situations. I mean, my character Melinda is going through a very hard situation. Her husband has just left her after 30 years and has announced that it's not really a spoiler because this happens quite early in the book, and announces that he's having a baby with a much younger woman. And that is very painful. And I fully acknowledge that pain. But I also think for me, anytime I've ever been in a painful situation, I have to try to see the absurdity of it, the humor of it. It just helps me get through the day. It just, it's sort of the way I function. And so that's what I try to bring to writing. But it's challenging. I find it very difficult. And sorry. I was just going to say, the only sort of thing I've noticed recently in reading and writing is it's a sort of the same thing we were saying with dialogue, like with knowing that audiences are paying attention. If two characters are speaking and something funny happens, and I struggled with this in The Sweet Spot a lot. And in fact, there's one place that I read it recently and I was like, oh, maybe I should have taken that out. But if two characters are talking and it's funny, you don't need to show them laughing their heads off, because then it's sort of like a comedian laughing at their own joke. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know, like if a comedian tells a joke and then they laugh and you're sort of like, well, maybe I didn't find it so fun. I don't know. So whenever I read, or whenever I write and I have two characters and something funny happens, so I have one of them burst out laughing, I almost always go back and take that out, because I feel like it's signaling to the reader, see how funny
this is funny.
Yeah. And you shouldn't have to signal that to them. They should just know it. So that's one of the big edits that I try to do, is I try to make sure that I'm not saying to my readers, hey, this is a funny part. Like either they're going to find it funny or they're not. I can't and shouldn't try to control that. So
It's such a great point.
It is.
It's such a great point.
Sorry.
Oh,
I was just gonna say, it makes me think of my excessive use of LOL in texting. Like, I'm almost guaranteed not laughing out loud, but I am smiling. I might be smirking, but I use LOL like almost at the end of every sentence.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I also find that movies and television can play an important role in our writing, whether it's the serious movies with the dramatic flair, or if it's the way an actor has this quirk about how he portrays something. Where I was watching something and the way the actor was flinching with his hands, and you could see his forearm twitch out of anger. I was like, oh, that is a really good move. I'm going to put that in the book. But when you were talking about the laughter aspect of things, when you think about comedies, you don't have, when you have that character, that there's always that one guy, the Chandler, what have you, in the show that's always the funny one, the funniest of them. They always edit out and they don't put in the whole group laughing over the joke that he just made. And you can go through whether it's a movie or a television show. If there's a joke, they don't leave that in the show. And that's exactly the point that you were making for the book.
Yeah.
When we write comedy into our novels, that's something that we should be aware of.
Yeah, I think it's just something to look at. If you're like, this is funny, like, this is awesome, this is so funny, you just don't need your characters to telegraph that out. Like, let it be funny by it, like, just let it be there. For me, that works better. I have to tell you guys, so I didn't write my first book till I turned 50, and I'm 57 now. So this is like my fourth career. So even talking about stuff like this, because you know that every book is different and every person is different. And it's so hard for me to even, not that it's hard for me to give it, I'm so happy to always like give advice or what do I think about this? But I think like a lot of us, we have to figure it out with each book, each time. And I just feel like I have so much to learn still. And that's why I read all the time. I read in my genre, I read out of my genre, because that's like other authors are teaching me all the time, like what works and why did that work? You know, now when I read, I'm like, that was brilliant. How did she do that? You know, how did she make that happen? And, but if I think if I'd been writing for, the last 35 years, maybe I'd be more confident, but I would just say, take everything that I say with a grain of salt. Take anything that any author says with a grain of salt, see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, it's not you, just try something different. Like,
absolutely. I could not agree with you more on that. I mean, my first book I published when I was 40, and I'm working on my third book. And this is again why we have this podcast, because we can talk to authors. And whenever anybody on any interview asks me, what's your number one piece of advice for writers? It's read everything. Read everything from the back of shampoo bottles to the classics. You have to read everything because that's the best way to learn. And I get really sketchy. I'm sure you both have seen it on social media. There's this crop of authors that are just like, hey, I'm going to teach you this success of writing these books. And, take my course. It's $300. And I'm going to teach you how to be a bestseller. And then I've actually gone in and I have looked at the authors. Like, okay, you write your bestseller. Okay, great. Let me go ahead and see, because I haven't heard of you. So I'm going to go ahead and look you up. And I've looked them up on like Amazon or something. And they've got like 2 books out that are like, they have, I mean, my books are not heavily reviewed, but they have less reviews than mine. And I'm like, okay, so you've got 2 stars and you're 2 5-star reviews and you're a bestseller author. Okay, that I'm right there with you on that. Okay, great, good for you. So yes, take everything do what works for you.
Listen, like, take the advice, and then just like, like some people say you must write every single day. I love that idea. I can't write every single day. I mean, I know we'll probably talk about this later, but I'm a binge writer. Like, I'm someone who is either percolating or I'm in total binge mode, which is the reason my dog, who's just making noise right over here, I hope that doesn't bother anyone. He literally started using piddle pads during one of my last binge sessions because I would forget to take the dog out. Like, I wouldn't even take the dog out. I wouldn't get dressed. My husband will go to work in the morning and he comes back and I'm still in bed, still in my pajamas with my laptop. And so as much as I love the idea of just write every day and I can try it, I'm happy to try anything. But it doesn't seem to be my thing. I write in big chunks. And, I think back to college and I had friends who would get the assignment and they would start, 3 weeks ahead of time and they would work 3 hours every day and never lose their minds. And I would just sort of be thinking about it. And then I wouldn't sleep for 3. I'd pull like 3 all-nighters. And
Oh,
and
I was definitely like a last minute, like night before kind of for who needs sleep. We
yeah,
I
can
do
knock
my
this
best
out.
work when I've spent weeks procrastinating, and I pull out a gem from my butt within 24 hours of the
because
deadline.
I think you've been thinking that whole time. I mean, and this is the other thing. We can call it procrastinating and pulled an all-nighter or whatever, but I remember saying to a friend of mine once, she was like, my God, you didn't start until yesterday, and I started 3 weeks ago. But we actually did the math. How many hours did she spend, and then how many hours did I spend? And it was the same. Like, she had spent 12 hours and I had spent 12 hours. Mine just happened to all be at the same time. I did 12 hours in a row, and she was sensible and did 3 hours a day, 4 days, and didn't lose her mind. But you can't be who you're not. You can only work the way I mean, you can try. I always, of course, say I'm going to have better habits, I'm going to try to have a better schedule. But somehow, I don't know, somehow we do what we do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about it, can you work in a 9 to 5 7 days a week? And the answer is no. I don't. Everybody who has to work a 9 to 5, and I'm sure many of us who are writers have worked a 9 to 5 in some
Yeah.
weird odd job at some point, and it's tiring, and you're going to need a day or two off at minimum. So why do the same thing to yourself and to your creativity? Why make yourself work 7 days in a row? You need time, and there are wonderful articles out there where you need time just to do nothing, just to sit on your ass and binge watch something on Netflix.
Yeah.
You need that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's going out into the world, and it's overhearing a conversation at a coffee shop, or it's going to see a play and something about that. And by the way, we were talking about read. I read plays also. I highly recommend reading plays, just because, again, it's a great way to see good dialogue on the page. And it's just a different format. And so it just helps me a lot. I love reading plays. But sometimes you just need to get away from your laptop and just go out in the world a little bit, and something unexpected will happen and will give you some little gem of an idea that, you can bring with you when you return to your laptop. So,
yes.
Yeah. I used to do the 1,000 words a day rule. You have to write 1,000 words a day. And then it's like that for me. I mean, if I know many authors, they have, write a page. We've had authors who write a page a day, or write for an hour, or write, they have a word count. But I can't do that, because if I'm aware of started echoing. If I'm paying attention to, okay, I've written 500 words left, then what I'm writing turns out to be crap, because I'm more focused on hitting my goal than actually writing something worth. And I know you can go back and edit it, obviously, but I like to start with something good.
When I'm drafting,
workable,
Yeah. And when I'm drafting, I like to do the 1,000 words and minimum. It's like, that's my goal. And there are times where I'm just like, if I'm struggling, I'm going to sit there and just look at that. And I have Scrivener, so I have to hit a special button to be able to see what my word count is. And so there are times where I'm looking every 50 words, like, okay, am I there yet? Am I there yet? But then there's other times where you're just like on that high, where you're just like, it's just coming out, spewing out like gold. But it's all about what works for you as a writer. There's no one way to write a book.
Right. No. And I think
as long as you write,
even from one book to the next book, it might even be different, but I have so many writer friends who I admire so much, and we each have our way of doing things. And so I just think people should know, it's like, you try everything and see what works for you. And I mean, I actually don't recommend my way, because there are those binge weeks are not attractive. It's
I was telling my husband, so we have this way where if I'm drafting a book, I go into gremlin mode, is what we refer to it, where dishes are not done, the house is
Right.
not clean. I am in the same clothes for like a week straight because my focus is on the book itself.
Yeah.
And then when I go into editing mode, that's when I clean up everything that I've done during gremlin mode because I'm procrastinating because I don't want to do the editing, though I know the editing is where the true writing comes into play.
Right.
So
You know,
now, oh, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say with the sweet spot, just speaking of editing, I wrote the entire book in first person from one of the characters.
Mhm.
And I mean the entire book, and realized at the end that it did not work. It just didn't work. And it didn't hold up. And I started over again from scratch. Like, so
I'm so
painful.
glad you said that. 'Cause I did that. The book that I'm working on, I did the same thing. I did the same damn thing where I did it was 3 different perspectives, all from the first person. And I don't know why I was afraid of doing third person. Like, you get into this, like, okay, you got to do first person because this is what you write. But every book is different. Everything is different. And there's no one way to write a book, regardless of how many books you've written.
And it's, what does the story need? Like, how does this story need to be told? And I just got it into my head. This was the way the story needed to be told. And when it wasn't working, I just was trying to force it to work. You know,
Mhm.
I just was like so insistent that this was going to be a first person book. And by the time I got to the end, it just failed because I was trying to tell the story of these 3 women in the book, but my character was actually the grandmother, Evelyn. She was my first person narrator because I thought, how cool. I'll have this older woman watching everything happen and she'll be the one to tell the story. But then I was like, man, that's an important role for her. I better justify her existence as the narrator of my story. So I kept giving her backstory. And then I gave her some more backstory. And then I thought, well, she needs an arc. So I started giving her a whole plot. And then I sent her off on a trip at one point and left the 3 women in New York. And by the time I got to the end, I had 2 books. I just had 2 complete. I had this book about women, and then I had this book about this older woman. And I realized she was not the right person to tell the story. And I wish I had noticed that a little sooner. Yes, I do wish that. But you know, it's never a waste of time. What I learned writing that first draft, I got to know my character so well. I got to know her so well. Writing her she ended up with 1 chapter, close third, but only 1 chapter in the final version. But boy, was that chapter fun to write because I knew this woman inside and out, you know, knew everything about her. So it's not a waste of time, but it was time consuming. It's not my favorite thing to realize that you have to start a book over from scratch. Writing is just so hard. I think what I didn't realize is that I always knew writing was difficult, but it's so hard. And I'm 4 books in now and I'm starting the 5th and it just stays hard. You have to love it. Like, you have to love the work, but it doesn't get easier for me. I mean, I learn things, but then new problems crop up. So it's just a challenge.
Writing's a drug. You
joyful
can't,
challenge.
it's you can't imagine doing anything else. It will kill you, it'll make you cry, it'll give you sleepless nights, but God damn, you can never imagine doing anything else. And I'm swearing a lot tonight, aren't I? I'm
That's
quite
like
salty tonight.
$3 to the college fund.
I had only $3. Shall I swear
my
2 more times
kids
to make
are-
it 5? Even 5?
My kids are going to college funded solely on the Auntie Diana swear fund.
Yes, I love it.
And I am proud of it. I am proud of every moment of that. Once I have a kid of my own, they are going to swear up a kazoo.
So I know we have kept you far longer than roughly 30 minutes. That's why we say roughly. We give ourselves a cushion. But do you have time for one last question before we let you go? So we have our Wine Women in Words survey that we started last year of pantsing versus plotting, because I am a pantser. I write fantasy, not been published yet, but my characters rule what we're going to write about that day, and we'll see what happens. But in the real world, where I have to like run tiny human lives, I'm very organized, and I have my schedule, and everything is like, my eye twitches if things go a little off schedule. Diana is like the queen of chaos in her world, but in her writing, she's a plotter all the way through. So we like to ask our writers if they are like me, where they pants but very organized in their real world, or like Diana,
Well,
or,
and I wanna,
or a combination.
Yeah, and I want to bring in the caveat that when it comes to plotting, it's having that guide rail, having this one set, this plot that you put in, and if you go away, you go away, but you can come back to it. You have a point of reference that you can come back to. That's what plotting is, and that's all I want to make sure we have that all. So before you answer.
Because I know many planners, and they always say, and don't forget, if my original plan doesn't work, I tweak the plan, or I, like you said, you sort of go off here, but then you come back to it. It's probably not a surprise to you that I am a pantser. I need to know who my characters are, and the way I get to know them is by writing and having them have conversations with people and having them react to certain situations, and then realizing that I got it wrong and starting over again. Sadly for me, I'm a bit of a pantser in real life too. Sort of more consistent. And in fact, I'm kind of like I either don't do the laundry or I do all of the laundry. So it's kind of I either do not cook, or I'm in a cooking mode and I cook 4 nights in a row, so I'm pretty consistent, I think. I also think that both can work beautifully. I've tried outlining, and I think, I taught high school English for years, and I'm a huge believer in the outline, especially for like any kind of academic writing. For me, I just have a very hard time with that, because I don't know what's going to happen until I figure out who my people are. I don't know who my people are until I write them doing things. And so I think it's kind of a little slow, but it somehow that's the way I like to do it. I'm going to try writing some first person monologues before I get too far into this next book, and just sort of in a theatrical way, try to get to know their voices a little bit by just writing some monologues. Not that they'll ever end up in the book, just for my homework. I think I'm going to try doing a little bit more of that at the outset and see if that works for me. I always am happy to try any technique that people offer. And somebody said to me, have you tried either writing their biographies or writing monologues? And I just think I'll give that a try. I will keep you posted as to whether or not it actually works for me.
Interesting. Yes, definitely keep us posted on that.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, if you would like to order your own copy of The Sweet Spot, it actually just had a pub day last week, the week before.
Last week, it published last Tuesday. It's the Barnes & Noble pick of February, which is really nice because
that's exciting.
And I'm elated today because it got a really nice Washington Post review today.
Wonderful.
Made me
Congratulations.
so happy, because she talks about how it's like having airplanes up in the air, but then somehow I managed to get the planes in the hangar. Not a direct quote. I'm sure I'm getting that completely wrong, but it was something like that. It was kind. So I'm really relieved and happy about that.
That's so awesome. Well, you can order your own copy of The Sweet Spot since it is now out in the world. You can always check out our show notes and click on our link to our bookshop on bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports our wonderful writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And Amy, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We've kept you for the full hour, so we had a blast chatting with you.
Thank you so much. I just loved getting to talk to you. Thank you.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of your evening.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.